My husband demanded a divorce. He said, "I want the home, the cars, everything but the son my attorney pleaded with me to fight." I said, "Hand it all to him." Everyone thought I'd lost my sanity. At the last hearing, I signed everything away. He grinned until his lawyer went pale when... Could you ever imagine a betrayal so deep, so utterly despicable, that your own husband asks for a divorce, demanding everything? The house, the cars, all your savings, but specifically not your son? And then, what if I told you I'd just let him have it all? Everyone thought I was completely losing my mind. For the longest time, I believed I had a good marriage. Maybe not a fairy tale, but solid. David and I met when I was 23, he 25. Young, ambitious, full of dreams. He was a junior associate, drowning in student loans. I was a nurse, working brutal 12-hour shifts, proud to be helping people. We fell in love fast, that intense, everything is possible kind of love. He brought me flowers, planned dates we could barely afford, talked about making partner, the house we'd buy, the kids we'd raise. I felt safe. I believed he was my partner for life. We married 2 years later. A small, simple ceremony my parents paid for because we were both struggling. I wore a sale dress, he borrowed a suit. It didn't matter, we had each other, and that felt like enough. Those early years were tough financially, but emotionally, I remember them as happy. We lived in a tiny apartment where the heat barely worked. I kept nursing, he worked 80-hour weeks. We ate cheap, drove old cars, dreaming of a day things would be easier. Then, Jake came along. 3 years into our marriage. Not planned, but not unwanted. A positive test, a mix of panic and joy. David seemed happy then. He went to appointments, helped paint the nursery corner in our cramped space. He held Jake in the hospital, tears in his eyes, telling me I'd given him the greatest gift. But something shifted after Jake was born. I didn't recognize it then, or I made excuses. David became more career-focused, more distant. He'd come home to a crying baby and an exhausted wife, and he just seemed irritated. I told myself it was normal. New dads feel pressure. So I shouldered it all. Most of the childcare, part-time nursing shifts that fit his schedule. I was essentially a single parent, but still married. David's career exploded. Junior partner when Jake was 4, big salary jump, even longer hours. Travel, clients, conferences. He changed. More confident, yes, but also more arrogant. More concerned with appearances than with us. We moved out of the tiny apartment, then again into a much larger house in an expensive neighborhood. I was thrilled, throwing myself into making these houses a home. Decorating, gardening, playdates. He barely noticed. 2 years later, he made full partner. His income soared. I wanted to go back to nursing full-time. I missed the work, the independence. But David discouraged it. Said his career needed a flexible wife, someone who could entertain clients, handle household matters. Said we didn't need my income. I should enjoy being home. Reluctantly, I agreed. But I felt a part of myself, something essential, slipping away. Jake became my world. My bright, sweet boy. I drove him, picked him up, helped with homework, volunteered at a school. I was at every game, every recital. While David built his life around his career, I built mine around our son. Our lives ran on parallel tracks, rarely intersecting. As his success grew, David became critical, demanding. He found fault with everything. How I ran the house, raised Jake, presented myself. He'd make comments about my weight or clothes, disguised as concern, but they felt like sharp criticisms. He dismissed my opinions, talked over me, treated me like an employee. I swallowed these small humiliations. I told myself his career was stressful. I clung to the memory of the young man who once brought me flowers. Then it happened. The cliché. His phone, buzzing on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to call him to dinner. But then I saw the messages. From M. The frequency, the timing. I glanced, and my blood ran cold. Explicit. Sexual. An ongoing relationship, not a one-time mistake. Photos, I could see the thumbnails. No shame. No boundaries. Inside jokes. Intimacy. My world dropped out from under me. I confronted him that night, after Jake was asleep. Who was M? How long? He didn't even try to deny it. He barely seemed sorry. M was Miranda, a young associate at his firm. 8 months. He said it so casually, like discussing the weather. He said Miranda made him feel alive, appreciated, in ways I no longer did. Our marriage had been dead for years, he claimed, just going through the motions for Jake. Devastated. Furious. A vibrating rage I'd never known. I demanded he end it. Counseling. We'd rebuild. But he refused. He was done pretending. He wanted a divorce. He'd already spoken to a lawyer. He was moving forward, with or without me. The next weeks were a blur of shock, grief, logistics. He moved out, presumably closer to Miranda. I had to explain to 8-year-old Jake why Daddy wasn't home. Jake took it hard, crying, asking if it was his fault. Does Daddy still love me? Each question broke my heart. My lawyer, Sandra, a competent woman with 20 years of experience, told me I had a strong case. California was a community property state. I'd get half. Reasonable custody for Jake, spousal and child support. She was confident. Then, 3 months into the separation, David dropped the bombshell. His settlement proposal. So outrageous. So cruel. Even Sandra was shocked. He wanted the house, the vacation property, both cars, most of the financial assets. Full control of his business accounts. But the worst part, the part that made me feel sick to my stomach, his position on Jake. He wanted me to have full physical custody, minimal visitation for him, limited child support. The message was brutally clear. He didn't want to be bothered with raising his son. He wanted to be free, to live his new life with Miranda, without the inconvenience of fatherhood. Sandra was outraged. Unconscionable, she called it. No judge would ever approve. She assured me we'd fight. Demand proper division, fair support, shared custody. She laid out her strategy. She was confident, but a strange calm settled over me. A clarity, like a voice in my head. I asked Sandra for a few days to process. She agreed, probably thinking I needed time to grieve. That night, I put Jake to bed, read him an extra story, held him longer. A fierce, protective love gave me strength. Then, I sat at my computer. I started researching, digging into financial records, legal documents, things I'd never bothered to look for when I trusted him. I worked through the night, following threads, downloading documents, taking notes. What I found was infuriating and empowering. He'd been hiding money for years, accounts he thought I didn't know about, financial impropriety at his firm, details about Miranda that went back much further than 8 months using firm resources, and the documentation to prove all of it, files he'd carelessly left on our shared home computer. I spent days making copies, uploading to secure cloud storage, emailing files to myself. I consulted quietly with a forensic accountant, someone who owed me a favor. He confirmed it. David had systematically hidden assets. His divorce filing was a lie. When I went back to Sandra's office, I told her something that made her question my sanity. I wanted to accept David's proposal, exactly as he'd written it. The house, the cars, all the assets. Full custody of Jake, minimal support. Give him everything he was demanding. Without a fight, Sandra stared at me in disbelief. She thought I'd broken down. She tried to talk me out of it, said I was entitled to more, that I'd be financially devastated, that I'd regret it forever. But I was calm, insistent. I have my reasons, I said. Please trust my judgment. I refused to explain. I just wanted it finalized. Fast. On his terms. I signed everything, even the documents acknowledging I was proceeding against legal advice. David's side was swift and gleeful. His lawyer, Robert Finch, had expected a battle. When Sandra submitted my acceptance, without changes, without counteroffers, there was silence. Then quick agreement. They pushed for the fastest possible finalization, probably terrified I'd come to my senses. My friends and family were horrified. My mother cried, begged me to reconsider. My sister was angry. My friends staged an intervention. But I listened with a small, mysterious smile. Thanked them for caring, but insisted I knew what I was doing. I just wanted it over, so Jake and I could start our new life. Some thought I was too heartbroken to fight. Others wondered about some secret agreement. Even Jake, at 8, sensed something was wrong. He'd heard enough adult conversations to know I was giving up things I shouldn't. He asked if we'd be okay, if we'd have to move. I hugged him tight. Everything will be fine, I promised. I have a plan. You just have to trust me. The day of the final hearing arrived quickly. I dressed carefully, a simple navy dress. I wanted to look calm, composed. I left Jake with my sister. Sandra, still trying to convince me to ask for a continuance, warned me about financial hardship. She kept saying it wasn't too late. David arrived with his expensive lawyer, Robert Finch. Confident, relaxed, barely a glance my way. He looked like a man who'd already won. Judge Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 60s, reviewed the settlement. Her frown deepened, clearly troubled by how one-sided it was. She asked me directly if I understood. If I comprehended I was waiving my rights. I answered clearly, confidently. Yes, I understood completely. I wanted to proceed, voluntarily, without coercion. I just wanted it over, cleanly. The judge was skeptical, but had no legal grounds to refuse an agreement both parties had signed. She went through the formal process. David answered with barely suppressed satisfaction. His lawyer listed all the assets David would keep, confirming I was receiving essentially nothing beyond personal belongings and full custody of Jake, with minimal support. Then came the moment I had been building toward. Judge Morrison asked if either party had anything else to submit. I stood up. My voice, surprisingly steady, cut through the courtroom silence. Yes, Your Honor. Actually, I have something the court should see. Sandra looked at me, surprised. David glanced over with mild annoyance. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder. I handed it to the bailiff. These are financial records, I explained, showing assets David has not disclosed in his divorce filings. Hidden accounts and investments. Evidence of financial misconduct at his law firm. Proof that David perjured himself in his sworn financial declarations. The color drained from David's face. Robert Finch started to object, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. Silence. She began reviewing the documents. The courtroom was utterly quiet except for the rustle of paper. Bank statements, account records, email evidence, everything I had compiled. Robert Finch became increasingly panicked, whispering frantically to David, who had gone from confident to terrified in minutes. Judge Morrison looked up. Shock. Anger. Mr. David, do these accounts exist? Why were they not disclosed? He stammered something about mistakes, oversights. She cut him off. These are not minor errors. This is systematic concealment of assets. Then, she turned to the evidence about his firm. David using firm money for personal expenses. Funding his relationship with Miranda. The apartment where they were living. I requested permission to address the court further. Granted, I explained, in clear, simple terms, that I had discovered his hidden assets weeks ago. But I had chosen to let him proceed with his proposed settlement. I had agreed to his terms, knowing they were based on fraudulent disclosure, because I wanted him to commit to his lies, under oath, in legal documents, before I reveal the truth. Under California law, a spouse who commits fraud and financial disclosure faces severe penalties. I had essentially let David hang himself with his own greed and dishonesty. I had given him the rope, and he fashioned it into a noose, without ever realizing it. I also revealed documentation proving he had been planning this divorce for over a year. That his affair with Miranda had been going on for nearly 2 years, not 8 months. That he had been systematically moving money into hidden accounts for 18 months, specifically to prepare for the divorce. This wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, planned fraud. I had let him build his case on lies. Then I produced the evidence that destroyed everything. Robert Finch finally found his voice, objecting strenuously. An ambush! I should have disclosed this earlier. I acted in bad faith. But Judge Morrison shut him down. Fast. David had the legal obligation to provide full disclosure. I had no duty to help him fulfill that obligation. She said my lawyer might have advised me poorly by letting me accept such a bad settlement, but my tactical choice to let David incriminate himself was not illegal. The judge announced she was rejecting the proposed settlement entirely, ordering a full forensic accounting. David's law license could be in jeopardy. She was referring the evidence of firm misappropriation to the appropriate authorities. New hearing date, 3 months out. Complete financial disclosure. The look on David's face. I'll never forget it. From smug confidence to confusion to terror to rage. He stood up, started to yell at me. The judge gavaged him, warned him about contempt of court. His lawyer physically restrained him, pulled him back into his seat, whispering urgently. David sat there, hands clenched, face twisted with fury. The wife he discarded had just destroyed him. Sandra looked at me, dawning comprehension and awe. She finally understood. My calm, my confidence. She told me, walking out of that courtroom, that in 20 years, she'd never seen anything like it. News spread like wildfire. The wife who pretended to accept nothing, then produced evidence that destroyed her husband's case. Instant gossip. I got calls, messages. David's firm distanced itself. He was placed on administrative leave. His partnership suspended. His cases reassigned. Miranda, whose name appeared in my documents as benefiting from David's misuse of firm resources, was also placed on leave. Her promising legal career over. She made the classic mistake of tying herself to a powerful man without considering what would happen if his power disappeared. The forensic accounting revealed even more hidden assets. Offshore accounts, investments in trusts, property under shell companies. Over $2 million. David had been sloppy, overconfident. His lawyer withdrew. David hired a new one, specializing in bar complaints and fraud. A clear sign his problems went beyond divorce. The state bar opened a formal investigation. Disbarment was on the table. I received surprising public support. People who'd criticized me apologized, praised my strategic thinking. Other divorced women reached out, sharing their stories, wishing they'd been as smart. Even some of David's former colleagues privately told me they were glad he was finally held accountable. 3 months later, back in court, very different positions. David's new lawyer advised him to settle. Fighting was pointless. He could lose far more than half. Plus, he'd be paying both our legal fees. Sandra was aggressive now. She demanded 60% of all marital assets from me. Reimbursement for my legal fees, already over $30,000. Higher child support, based on his actual income. Provisions for Jake's inheritance. David had no choice. He agreed. The final settlement gave me the house, a car, over $1.3 million in cash and investments. Substantial monthly child support until Jake turned 18, plus his college education and life insurance. I also got permanent spousal support for 10 years, financial security, to rebuild my career. The custody arrangement, exactly as David had proposed when he thought he was dumping responsibility onto me. Minimal visitation, no decision-making power. Sole legal and physical custody. It was all documented. At his request, Judge Morrison approved it with obvious satisfaction. She looked directly at David, said he was fortunate I was willing to settle rather than pursue additional penalties. She praised my patience and strategic thinking. David signed the papers. Numb resignation. He'd lost his wife, his son, his reputation, most of his money, possibly his career. All because of greed and stupidity. And the mistress he'd destroyed his marriage for? She'd already left him once the scandal broke. I moved forward with surprising energy. Hired a contractor. Renovated the house that was now solely mine. My home office, my space. Jake's room, decorated his way. With financial security, I returned to nursing, but on my terms. Updated my credentials. I'd missed the work, the direct human connection. Jake adjusted. He missed his father, but David's minimal involvement made it clear Jake wasn't a priority. David would cancel last minute. Jake gradually stopped expecting much. I worked with a child therapist to help him process it all. I found friends and community support I hadn't realized I had. Other mothers reached out. I joined a book club, started yoga. I built a social life that was mine. I didn't need a man to feel complete. The money was carefully managed, invested for long-term security. I lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. Jake's future was protected. I'd never be financially dependent again. David's life continued to deteriorate. The state bar suspended his law license for 2 years. His career at the prestigious firm, effectively over. The firm sued him for damages. Miranda's career was destroyed too. She ended up leaving law entirely. He had to sell the house I'd originally agreed to let him keep. Moved into a modest apartment. Took a paralegal job for a fraction of his former salary. He went from successful partner to cautionary tale. Jake, at 9 and 10, understood. His father had done bad things. Abandoned him for money and another woman. David's inconsistent visitation, his discomfort with actual parenting, pushed Jake away. By 11, Jake was asking if he really had to go on court-ordered visits. I didn't feel satisfaction at David's suffering, though I'd be lying if I said I felt no justice. I focused on my life. On Jake. I kept communication factual, brief. Never badmouthed David to Jake. I wanted him to form his own opinions. I took the high road. Years passed. The drama faded. I gained perspective. My marriage had been problematic from the start. I'd ignored red flags, made excuses. I'd diminished myself, trying to fit David's vision of a wife, losing my identity. The divorce, painful as it was, freed me. I became my full self again. I returned to full-time nursing when Jake entered middle school. Challenging work I loved. Respected by colleagues, appreciated by patients. Jake grew into a thoughtful, resilient teenager. Confident without arrogance. Ambitious without being ruthless. Kind without being weak. He maintained minimal contact with David. He told me once he appreciated how I handled everything. How I protected him while letting him form his own relationship with his father. I started dating again. I approached relationships differently. Maintained my independence. Paid attention to how men actually treated me, not who they presented themselves to be. Love without respect is worthless. Partnership requires equality. I deserve someone who valued me. I wasn't in a hurry to remarry, but open to a true partner. My divorce strategy became a legend in local legal circles. Sandra told the story at seminars, emphasizing its risk and brilliant execution. Other women reached out for advice. I understood that courtroom moment was a turning point, not just in the divorce, but in my life. The moment I stopped being a victim and became a victor. Not through aggression, but patience, intelligence, a refusal to be underestimated. David had mistaken kindness for stupidity. His arrogance was his downfall. The lesson wasn't about tricking people, but about unconventional approaches when dealing with someone without ethics. You don't have to fight on their terms. You can change the game. Apparent weakness can be strategic strength. My mother, who had been so upset, later apologized for doubting me. She said she should have trusted I had a plan. My relationship with her deepened. She became a source of wisdom. Jake also developed a closer relationship with her as David faded. About 8 years after the divorce, I ran into David at a restaurant. He was with a woman I didn't recognize. Awkward. He approached my table, polite. Asked about Jake. I responded politely. Brief. Superficial. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no curiosity. He was simply someone I used to know. The complete absence of feeling was remarkable. Proof I had truly healed. David was irrelevant. I wondered if he felt regret, but suspected it was selfish regret. Some people never learn. This encounter became a milestone. Confirmation. I'd moved on. I told my therapist how neutral I felt. Indifference, she said, was often the final stage of recovery from betrayal. By the time Jake was preparing for college, I had built a rich, fulfilling life. Promoted to a supervisory position at the hospital. Loved the work. Found love again, unexpectedly, with Tom. A widower and architect. We connected over shared experiences of loss and rebuilding. He was everything David had not been. A genuine partner. He encouraged my career. Celebrated my successes. Made Jake feel welcome. I could trust Tom in ways I hadn't trusted anyone since the early days of my first marriage. Jake left for college. I was proud of the young man he'd become. He was confident, ambitious, kind. He planned to go to medical school, inspired by my nursing career. The house felt too large without him, but I kept it. A tangible reminder of what I had fought for. My victory. Tom proposed. I said yes. A long engagement. A small wedding after Jake graduated. I reflected on the ultimate lesson. It wasn't about legal strategy or financial planning. It was about knowing myself, my strength, my worth, independent of any relationship. That you could lose everything material and still be fine as long as you had your self-respect and clarity. The courtroom moment was dramatic and satisfying, yes, but it wasn't the defining moment. That had been weeks earlier, alone at my computer, deciding to fight back with intelligence, not anger. Strategy, not confrontation. That was when I chose to be someone who would not accept being discarded and stolen from. I thought about all the people who thought I was crazy, worried I was broken. But sometimes you have to trust yourself, even when everyone else thinks you're wrong. That confidence was crucial. Victory wasn't just about the courtroom. It was the life I built afterward. The peace, the confidence, the joy. Jake growing into a good man. My career. Finding love again with Tom. Financial security. Looking in the mirror and liking the person I saw. It was moving beyond anger into genuine indifference about David's life. That was its own victory. Tom said I was the strongest person he'd ever known. That I had survived experiences that would have broken others and emerged better, not bitter. And I would remember the fear, the determination, the gamble. But mostly, I'd remember the choice I made to fight for myself and my son. The decision that I deserved better. The moment I became the architect of my own victory rather than the victim of someone else's cruelty. The story that began with a husband demanding everything except his son, and a wife agreeing to terms everyone thought were insane, ended with that wife building a life richer, more authentic, than anything her marriage had provided. The frozen smile, the pale lawyer, those were just symbols. The real ending was written in the life I created afterward. In my career, my second marriage, my relationship with my son. In every choice I made from that day forward to be someone who knew her worth. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have ever dared to make such a gamble? What would you have done differently? I truly want to hear your thoughts.